All right, Heidi, welcome back. We are going to be digging deeper into cultural identity and its influence on design. I know in our first interview, we kind of touched on some of it and your journey through being introspective and putting more of yourself and more people with similar backgrounds to you into your work and into your design. And I'm so excited. So I'm just gonna roll into it. And if you haven't yet, go check out our previous interview. She shares so much. I did not. I was so excited. This is our first time meeting, and so I didn't exactly know where the conversation would go, and you led it beautifully. So thank you, first of all. But yes, okay. So I'm with Heidi Lopez, a purposeful designer, and I would love to hear. So we've talked a little bit about your cultural identity and like your background with your parents. How have you what has your cultural identity journey been like?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Honestly, it's been very rough, very vulnerable, emotional, um, and I feel like it starts because we growing up. I always knew I was looking different. Um, with my hair. And I started talking Spanish right when I was born. So I started to learn English right when I started kindergarten and stuff. So um, I it was hard for me a bit sometimes to translate. Um,
Mhm.
but then as I got into school, it was like very easy to kind of pick up and everything. Um, and I feel like I started to notice the differences in other people. And I would always like constantly compare myself. And then growing into middle school and high school, I kind of got into this idea of assimilation where
Mhm.
I wanted to be like everyone else so that no one would kind of pick me out of the group. And so then I would start like adopting these American likeness. I would kind of push my cultural background to the back, to the side. I didn't really feel comfortable at times talking on the phone with my mom in Spanish
Mhm.
because I would get kind of like called out, not like made fun of or anything, but like, oh, like she's talking Spanish and like, the high school jokes. But
Yeah.
it kind of got to me at some points, and so I would always try to like go into a corner or go somewhere else. And people would like ask me about, oh, well, what do you do for, dinner or whatever, or even lunchtime. I would see like turkey sandwiches, like, the normal stuff that people bring. And I'd be like, oh, well, why can't I get that? Or when I go home, I have to like, you know, get rice and beans and chicken or beef, whatever, like the usual stuff that the Latin community eats, or like arepas, empanadas, all these different things. And I would constantly compare myself to everyone else. And so I feel like I kind of pushed myself down so much that when I finally got to JU, my undergrad, I started seeing so many different people from different backgrounds who were very proud and very like excited to tell you about where they're from.
Mhm.
And that kind of took me back and kind of pushed me into a huge like round of self-reflection.
Mhm.
And it was like very confusing time, very weird time. I hope other people can relate and it's not just me. But I started thinking like, oh my God, well, why was I doing all these different things and pushing my own, because I have two sides of myself. My like Americanness, where I was born here, I grew up here, I know the language, I know like the social cues, but I also have learned, from my ethnic community, my parents and my grandparents and my cousins and everything, like it's two halves of one whole, but I was really just thinking of one half.
Mhm.
And so I was kind of pushing life at 50% and then constantly thinking, oh, why am I feeling this way?
Mhm.
So I finally kind of figured out why I was feeling this way. And it kind of hurt me in later years because I kind of stopped talking in Spanish. And so I'm a lot better than I used to be now. And I am still working on it. But that was one thing that I kind of pushed aside and didn't want to like learn.
Mhm.
But now I'm very happy and, like, practicing and, like, doing it a lot more often. Even my mom's like, "Wow, your Spanish has gotten better." And I'm like, "Yes, mom." Like, I'm trying to get back there. And also, like, again, I connected greatly with when I started doing, like, my thesis on immigration. That's when I started to really, like, "Oh gosh, this is really heavy. I
Mhm.
kinda feel the same way some of these people feel." And then I started talking with my parents, and I even asked them how did, their own journey coming here. I started realizing all the sacrifices that they've had to do for, my sisters and I, all the work that they've had to go through. And I just like started like really just huge realization here, realization there. I'm like, oh, okay, this is why. Oh, okay, this is why. Um, and again, it was a very emotional like time for me. And I was trying to really like, I didn't know how to manage it.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of glad that my thesis came in at the time that this was happening too, because I could just put all of that into a focus of,
Yeah.
design. And
Mhm.
I was able to create like a book. I was able to create like interview cards,
Amazing.
pictures that I felt really like put all of my feelings into some sort of vessel.
Mhm.
And I'm very, happy that it happened that way because then I was able to make great personal connection with my work and what I wanna do for pretty much, like, the rest of my life. I don't wanna just make, random designs. I wanna make purposeful designs that have meaning, that have, like, a personal influence that can communicate with other people.
Mhm.
And so I was, really into that stage of my life, and I'm proud of who I am and where I am now because of what happened and how I grew up.
Mhm.
And that was also a huge reason why I wanted to continue that work when I was in grad school and create an even deeper book. And so I went and did interviews with other individuals at my university, and they were telling me pretty much everything that I was feeling at their age. So I was going through all of this when I was like 19, 20, and they're also like 19 and 20 while I'm like 24, 25 years later. And I'm like, "Oh, you feel this way too?" Like, "Well, why? Like, why haven't we like, why isn't this a bigger thing than it should be? Like, why?" Because I've always felt like alone in that sense, and I wasn't able to find a book on it. I really wasn't really able to find a specific way I was feeling in design. And
Right.
so I thought, "Okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to like try and do it myself." And so I did it. I built a book, and it was like the most amazing experience I have ever went through. And again, like we touched on this before, but I was able to meet like great people. It was a privilege and like honestly a blessing to be able to be entrusted with their words and like how they were feeling. And again, like photographs of them growing up, like I was able to really see like the vulnerable side of them. And it was so nice. And it got me like even more like self-reflection on how I had to overcome my split identity,
Mhm.
and be like, "Okay, well, that's fine, like, you have 2 sides of, a whole. You gotta, figure it out, get some stability, and that's okay, like, you can't have one without the other, because
Right.
that's just half of yourself, and it's okay, like and even if you can't figure it out now, some people figure it out when they're 30 or 40, it's fine, there's really no time limit, to really going through this type of, like, um, state of reflection and realization, so I feel like my journey through, identity is still ongoing, um,
Mhm.
but that's great too because then you kind of, like you reintroduce yourself to yourself, and it's so nice because I feel like a lot of times we kind of go through life meeting other people, but then we forget about, like, the main person, which is who you are, and
Mhm.
so it's good to, like, check in with yourself and be like, "Hey, like, are you okay? Are you good?" Whatever, and, I feel like a lot of people don't really, make that, an importance in their life, so I feel like everything is always ongoing, you always, learn something new about yourself, you're always, like, changing as well, Um, but yeah, I hope that answers your question. I feel like I kind of went on a tangent.
No, you're so good. You definitely answered the question. I mean, I think that's the piece about cultural identity and like having so many different components. I think I've heard so much in the last year just in conversations, like things that remind me of how like truly complex we each are as like human beings. And I think growing up, like, I mean, I was the same way. I think you get to a certain point where you are tired of feeling different that you just want to assimilate. And